I found them under a highway bridge in the middle of a storm. The man was clutching a baby girl to his chest, both soaked straight through, shivering. And that man was my grandson. For 30 years, I thought my son's betrayal was the worst pain I'd ever feel. The stolen accounts, my husband's heart attack when he realized our savings were gone, the loneliness that followed. But standing there in the mud, rain dripping from my hair onto my designer coat, staring into a young man's face that carried my husband's eyes, that pain didn't even come close. James Sterling. I called out, my voice barely carrying over the storm. He looked up fast, defensive, shielding that tiny baby like a soldier guarding treasure. "Who are you?" He barked, tense, protective. I crouched down, keeping my voice gentle. "My name is Alice Sterling," I said. "I'm your grandmother. I know your father told you I was dead, but I'm not." The look on his face in that moment, shock, confusion, disbelief. I knew everything was about to change. 3 days earlier, that moment wouldn't have even been imaginable. Because 3 days earlier, I was sitting in my Florida penthouse, pretending I didn't see the black folder sitting on my desk. It had been there for days. My assistant left it without a word, smart enough not to ask. I'd had my coffee beside it 3 mornings in a row, pushing papers around, taking calls, pretending not to notice. But today, I was tired of pretending. The Atlantic stretched out beyond my window. Blue, endless, flawless. This place was my sanctuary after Spencer died. White marble floors, glass, steel, no clutter, no color, no memories. I built it that way on purpose. And yet, after 28 years, it still doesn't feel like home. When I finally picked up the folder, it felt lighter than it should have been. $30,000 for 6 pages and 1 photograph. I guess truth doesn't weigh much these days. Inside, exactly what I expected. Decker Investigations. The final report. Decker himself retired years ago. His son handled this one, not as sharp as his father, but discreet enough. The Sterling name still opens doors when I need it to. The report was clinical. Name: James Spencer Sterling, age 28. Occupation: factory worker, terminated. Residence: none. Location: Columbus, Ohio. Then the line I couldn't get past. Parents: Gregory and Brenda Sterling. Estranged. I stared at those 2 words, estranged. And then another memory hit me, like a wave I thought had long since gone still. I already knew he existed, of course. I hired my first investigator 30 years ago, back when Gregory disappeared with every cent of our money. By then, Brenda was already pregnant. I wanted to know where they went, what they did with Spencer's retirement fund, our emergency accounts, the bonds meant for our grandchildren's education. What I found made me sick. They were living comfortably in Seattle. Gregory had a new job, using Spencer's name and connections to build a new life for himself. I shut the investigation down after Spencer's funeral. What was the point? But 3 weeks ago I woke up at 2 a.m, no dream, just alert, like my soul had been shaken awake. Spencer used to say that's what it feels like when someone walks over your grave. I got up, made tea, sat at the kitchen table, waiting for something I couldn't name. By sunrise, I'd called Decker's son, gave him Gregory's name. I told myself it was just curiosity, closure maybe, but I think I already knew. The report detailed every step of James's fall. Born in Seattle, moved to Ohio at 6, no record, decent student. Married young, a daughter, Sophie Marie Sterling, 16 months old. Worked 5 years at a factory, laid off when the plant downsized, and then the unraveling. His wife left him. His car got repossessed. He lost the apartment. Tried to get a bed at a homeless shelter, waitlisted. Called his parents for help. They denied him 2 words. Request denied. Cold, cruel, familiar. Gregory had denied his own son shelter, just like he denied us any explanation when he robbed us blind and disappeared. Some cycles don't break. They just repeat through generations like a curse. The last page was the photograph. A man sitting under a concrete overpass holding a baby wrapped in a faded jacket. The baby's hand reached up toward his face. I set the picture down carefully, afraid it might break apart if I touched it wrong. And suddenly I was back in our old house on Havenwood Drive. I remember walking in that day. Too quiet. Spencer's car was in the garage, but he didn't answer when I called. I found him in his study, standing in front of the wall safe, open and empty. "Gregory took it all," he said. Not even a question. Just a flat statement, his voice hollow. By the time I reached him, his color had turned gray. His left hand clutched his chest. I ran for the phone, but I didn't make it in time. The doctors called it a massive coronary, said it was natural, but I knew better. Spencer Sterling didn't die from clogged arteries. He died from a broken heart. That memory faded, leaving me alone again in my glass cage above the city. The folder was still there. So was that photograph? My husband's legacy living under a bridge. I realized then that for 3 decades, I'd been haunting my own life, running Havenwood properties just to fill the silence. No holidays, no dinner parties, no friends. People called me the Ice Queen. I never corrected them, because ice preserves things, like grief, like fury, like purpose. I closed the folder with a soft thud, and for the first time in 30 years, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I pressed the intercom. "Margaret, call the jet service. I need to be in Columbus tomorrow, and have Arthur arrange transportation there." "Yes, Mrs. Sterling. Will anyone be joining you?" "No," I said. "This one's personal." I walked to the window. 65 floors below, people moved like ants. Tiny, forgettable. For so long, I thought I was above it all, untouchable, safe. Not anymore. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the cold bite through the warmth of the room. I'm 78 years old. I have more money than I'll ever need. A company that carries my husband's name, but what I don't have is time, or family. And somewhere out there, under a dripping concrete bridge, my grandson and his baby girl are fighting to survive, without knowing that I even exist. That ends tomorrow. He doesn't know that his eyes, if they're anything like the ones in that driver's license photo, from the report, are the exact same deep brown as my husband's. He doesn't know that when he frowns, the corners of his mouth pull down the same way Spencer's used to when he was trying not to show emotion. He doesn't know any of it. But he will. I haven't prayed since the day they buried Spencer. Haven't believed in much of anything since then. But standing in front of my window, watching the vast blue of the Atlantic stretch out forever, I found myself hoping, really hoping, that maybe, just maybe, some trace of Spencer lived on in that young man. That Gregory's poison hadn't reached all the way down to his son. Tomorrow, I'd find out. Tomorrow, I'd meet the last of the Sterlings, even if he didn't know that's who he was. The next morning, the jet engines hummed like an old lullaby I'd forgotten the words to. 6 hours from West Palm Beach to Columbus. 6 hours to question my sanity. Outside the window, clouds rolled beneath us like white cotton fields, endless and calm. My untouched lunch tray sat beside me, some salmon dish Margaret had ordered. I couldn't stomach it. I'd been living on coffee and sheer willpower for 3 days now, bitter and necessary both. The flight attendant, Jessica, appeared at my elbow. She'd worked for me for nearly 10 years, but she still had that quiet, cautious tone of someone who never forgot who signed her checks. "Mrs. Sterling, we'll be landing in 20 minutes," she said softly. "Your car is waiting. The weather in Columbus is less than ideal. Heavy rain. Should I arrange anything extra?" I shook my head. "No, I've packed for it." She smiled politely, nodded, and retreated. I could tell she wanted to ask questions but knew better. Most people who worked for me learned early on not to ask about my personal trips. As the plane began its descent, the clouds thickened, and when we finally broke through, Ohio sprawled beneath us, flat, gray, and tired-looking. Nothing like Florida's bright blues and greens. Honestly, it fit my mood perfectly. Thomas was waiting when I stepped off the jet. Same calm, unreadable expression. Same black Lincoln idling nearby. He'd been driving for me off and on for years, across 6 cities. Never asked who or why, just showed up. "Mrs. Sterling," he said with a small nod, opening the car door. "Thomas?" I greeted, managing a faint smile. "Good to see you again. Where to, ma'am?" I handed him a folded piece of paper with coordinates scribbled in my handwriting. He looked it over without changing expression. "Should be about 30 minutes, he said simply. We pulled away from the private terminal, merging onto the highway. Columbus looked like every other mid-sized American city. Same chain restaurants, same strip malls, same billboards shouting about debt relief and cheap insurance. That kind of sameness always used to comfort me. Predictable, safe. But the further east we drove, the scenery shifted. The road cracked more. The houses got smaller, older. Potholes widened. Then came the pawn shops, payday loan centers, liquor stores with barred windows. Neighborhoods that used to hum with life now looked hollowed out. And then it started to rain. Light at first, then heavy, steady, relentless. The windshield wipers moved in a rhythm. Slap, 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 slap. It almost sounded like a heartbeat. I'd owned properties in places like this once, back in the early days. I used to walk through these neighborhoods with my clipboard and my eye for potential, spotting value beneath the decay. Spencer used to tease me about it, said I could see beauty in a crumbling wall if the foundation was strong enough. But this wasn't business. This was blood. Somewhere in this forgotten part of town was my grandson. My grandson, even thinking the word felt strange in my mouth. The car slowed as we approached the concrete underbelly of a massive highway overpass. The sound of rain on the roof grew louder, almost deafening. Through the window I could make out a small camp. Blue tarp, a battered tent, piles of what looked like possessions or maybe just trash. Thomas pulled the car onto the muddy shoulder. Tires hissed against the wet earth. He turned toward me, voice cautious. "Ma'am, this doesn't look..." He hesitated, choosing his words. "Safe. If you tell me what you need, I can check for you," he offered gently. I shook my head. My voice came out sharper than I meant. "No, Thomas. This one's mine." He gave a small nod and kept the engine running. "I'll be right here." I reached for my umbrella, stepped out, and the sound hit me. Rain roaring against the concrete, trucks thundering overhead, wind whipping through the gaps. The smell of wet dirt, exhaust, and something sour. Poverty has a smell, sharp and unforgettable. My shoes sank instantly into the mud. Italian leather, of course. A foolish choice, but I didn't stop. Each step felt heavier, the rain soaking my coat, my hair sticking to my face. The space beneath the bridge was a collage of survival. Discarded wrappers, crushed cans, broken glass, a shopping cart on its side. And there, tucked against a concrete pillar, was the tent, thin fabric trembling in the wind. I was halfway there when I heard it. A baby's cry. Not the loud, healthy wail of a tantrum. This one was weak. Exhausted. The sound of hunger and fever and fear all at once. My pace quickened, ignoring the mud splashing up my legs. When I reached the tent, the flap was half open. Inside, a man knelt with his back to me. His shoulders were hunched, thin beneath his soaked t-shirt. He was rocking something small in his arms, rhythmic, desperate movements. I froze. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. This was no longer a report, not a name on paper. This was flesh and blood. My grandson, James Sterling, I said quietly. He whipped around so fast it startled me. One arm clutched the bundle tighter, the other braced against the ground, ready to spring. And then I saw his face. God, Spencer's face. Younger, sharper maybe, but unmistakable. The same jawline, the same eyes, tired, wary, beautiful. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice hoarse from cold or anger or both. The baby stirred in his arms, crying harder. She was wrapped in a man's jacket, far too big for her, her tiny face red, her hair plastered with sweat. I stepped forward, angling my umbrella over the tent entrance to block the rain. It hit my shoulders in sheets, but I barely felt it. "She's burning up," I said softly. "That's a fever." He blinked, confusion flashing across his face. "What do you want? We don't have anything." "I'm not here to take anything from you," I said, lowering myself to his level despite the mud soaking my knees. "My name is Alice Sterling, nothing." Blank confusion. "I'm your grandmother." He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "That's not possible," he said flatly. "My grandparents are dead." Both sides, I met his eyes. "Your father told you that about me." "He lied, James." Gregory lied. The second I said his father's name, something shifted in his expression. Not trust, but recognition. A heaviness, a bruise that still hurt. "I don't know what kind of scam this is," he said, voice rough, "but I'm not interested." He started to turn away. But the baby cried again, weaker now. "She needs a doctor," I said quietly. He snapped back toward me, his voice cracking. "You think I don't know that?" "The ER said it's just a cold, gave me Tylenol and sent us away. She's been like this for 3 days. I studied him for a moment. His face, his posture, the exhaustion written in every line of his body. "When's the last time you ate, James?" I asked softly. He looked away. For 3 days, the house felt like it was holding its breath. James kept to the east wing. Sophie's laughter, soft, uncertain at first, became the only sign that they were still there. Maria said she'd begun to recognize faces, to smile when she saw her father, to reach for the mobile hanging over her crib. Every report made me strangely nervous, as if some part of me expected them to vanish in the night, leaving only the faint scent of baby powder and formula behind. I didn't go looking for him. Not yet. Healing, I've learned, can't be hurried. So I kept to my routines. Morning coffee at the terrace, a call with my accountant, reviewing architectural plans for the community center project. But nothing filled the silence that settled after sundown. The house was too big for one soul. It always had been. I caught myself more than once walking past the east wing door, pausing to listen. Sometimes I'd hear faint movement, a lullaby from Maria, or James's low voice reading softly to his daughter. Once, late at night, I stood there longer than I should have. "Can't sleep?" Maria's voice startled me from behind. She was coming back from the laundry room, a folded blanket in her arms. "Old habit," I said, forcing a smile. She nodded, her eyes kind. "He's a good father, Mrs. Sterling. Very patient. But very tired. Not just from the road. From life." Her words sat with me long after she disappeared down the hall. On the 4th morning, I found James in the garden. He was sitting on the edge of the fountain, Sophie in her stroller beside him, sunlight catching on her pale curls. He looked different, clean-shaven, wearing one of the shirts I'd bought, but still wary, still unsure if he belonged here. "She likes the sound of water," he said without turning when he heard me approach. I smiled. Spencer designed that fountain himself. He said it should sound like laughter when the wind hits it right. James nodded slowly. "Guess he succeeded." There was a long pause. I sat down beside him, careful to keep just enough space between us. "She's stronger," I said softly, looking at Sophie. "Yeah," he replied. "Eating better, sleeping better, smiling more. You probably saved her life." "I think you did that," I said. "You kept her alive long enough to be found." He exhaled, a shaky breath, the kind a person takes when they're not sure they deserve praise. "Back under that bridge," he said after a while. "I thought we'd reached the end of the road. I didn't even know what I was doing there anymore. I'd lost my job, our apartment, and then when I called my dad..." He stopped, shaking his head. He told me not to come around again. Said I'd made my bed. The quiet that followed was heavy. I wanted to tell him everything right then. About the theft, the betrayal, the way Gregory broke this family long before he was born. But the truth is a delicate thing. It has to be given in doses. Instead, I said, "Some people confuse control with love. Your father was raised by one of those people." His eyes lifted to mine, searching. "You mean you?" It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. "Yes," I admitted quietly. "I made mistakes. I was proud, demanding. I thought success would protect us from everything that could go wrong. But it didn't." He looked away toward Sophie. "He told me you cared more about money than family, and he cared more about revenge than either." Our eyes met again, and something unspoken passed between us. Recognition, maybe, or just the beginning of understanding. That evening, I found a folded note outside my door. "Thank you for everything. I need to clear my head. I'll be back before dinner." He came back hours later, long after the sun had dipped behind the palms. His shirt was damp from the humidity, his hair tousled. "Walk go well?" I asked. He shrugged. "Better than sitting still." He hesitated before continuing. "I drove through town. Everyone knows you here. The Sterling name's on half the buildings." Spencer believed in building things that last, I said. Yeah. He looked thoughtful. Guess it's in the blood. There was something in his tone, wistful, almost boyish. I recognized it. It was the same tone Spencer used when he talked about the future he'd wanted for Gregory. For the first time, I saw not the man under the bridge, but the man my husband would have wanted his grandson to be. That night, I opened the locked drawer in my desk. Inside were the files I'd sworn I'd never look at again. Bank statements, police reports, the forensic audit from the year Gregory drained every cent from our accounts. I spread them across the desk, the paper yellowed at the edges. Spencer's handwriting in the margins, his calculations, his heartbreak spelled out in numbers. I found the last thing he ever wrote. If he ever comes back, forgive him for my sake, but make sure he understands what he did. My throat tightened. I closed the folder and sat there a long while. The house silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Maybe this was the chance Spencer had meant. Not to forgive Gregory, but to give his son, and his son's child, something better. 2 days later, James asked if we could talk. We met in the library, Spencer's old domain, filled with the scent of leather and paper and old grief. He stood near the fireplace, his hands in his pockets. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about work, about trying to stand on my own again." "That's good," I said. "There's an open position at one of our developments downtown. Project assistant. Nothing glamorous, but honest work. You'd report to our site manager, not to me." He blinked, clearly surprised. "You'd hire me?" "I'd give you a chance," I said. "The rest would be up to you." He looked down, nodding. "I don't want charity." "It's not charity," I said gently. "It's opportunity. And for the record, I don't believe in handouts. I believe in building foundations." He smiled faintly. "Like your husband?" "Exactly like him." For the first time, I heard real warmth in his laugh. That evening, I found Sophie crawling toward the sunbeams spilling across the nursery floor. She stopped, looked up at me, and reached her tiny hands in the air. I picked her up, her weight pressing against my chest. Her skin smelled faintly of milk and baby soap. She grabbed the pearl strand at my neck, tugging with surprising strength. "Easy, little one," I murmured, laughing softly. "You'll break something that's older than both of us." James appeared in the doorway, watching quietly. "She likes you," he said. "I like her, too," I replied. And then after a pause, he added quietly, "I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened between my dad and you, but I think I want Sophie to grow up knowing you." The words hit deeper than I expected. For 30 years, I thought legacy was about wealth, property, the sterling name etched in marble. But standing there, holding that child, I realized it wasn't about buildings or balance sheets. It was about blood, about forgiveness, about daring to rebuild what others destroyed. I smiled at him, my voice low. "Then we start from here." He nodded, his eyes steady. "From here." As he took Sophie from my arms, the faint scent of rain drifted through the open window. Somewhere outside, the fountain laughed again. And for the first time since Spencer's death, Havenwood felt alive. "Well, Sarah usually gets up first with Emma," the husband said, chuckling softly. James nodded thoughtfully. "Then you'll want the nursery close to the master bedroom. Trust me, when it's 2 a.m. and you're stumbling half asleep for a bottle, 15 extra steps feel like a mile." The couple laughed. The tension eased. I watched from behind the glass wall, arms folded loosely across my chest. He wasn't selling them a house. He was helping them imagine a life. That had been Spencer's gift, too. By the time I left the office that afternoon, I knew James had closed the deal. Later that evening, Martin Reeves, who rarely complimented anyone, stopped by my office. "Your new kid's sterling. He's got instincts you can't teach," he said gruffly. "Doesn't talk much, but people trust him." I smiled faintly. Spencer would have loved to hear that. Over the next 2 years, James built a quiet reputation at Havenwood. Not flashy, not ambitious in the traditional sense. Just steady, grounded. Clients came back asking for him by name. His desk became the one everyone stopped by for advice. The rare kind that came from listening, not talking. Sophie grew too. She was 5 now. Bright, curious, endlessly talking. She called me Nana Alice the first time she stayed over in the main house. And though I laughed it off, something inside me cracked open that day. A small, mended seam in a heart that had once sworn it couldn't break again. James still didn't ask for much. He lived modestly in one of the smaller cottages on the estate, worked long hours, and kept his world small. But the shadow of Gregory, his father, lingered between us like a ghost neither of us knew how to exorcise. One Sunday afternoon, I found James sitting on the porch steps of his cottage, an unopened envelope in his hands. Sophie was napping inside. He didn't look up as I approached. "It's from him," he said flatly. I sat down beside him. "Gregory?" He nodded, turning the letter over once before setting it on the table between us. "Came in the mail this morning. No return address, just his handwriting." I studied the envelope. The sight of that familiar angular script sent a chill through me. It was Spencer's handwriting, warped, bitter, changed, but undeniably the same. "Are you going to open it?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time. Then finally, "I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me doesn't want to give him that power again." I reached across, covering his hand lightly. "Then don't. Not yet." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You never talk about him." "Because every time I do," I said softly, "I end up talking about loss." James nodded, then leaned back, staring at the horizon. He wasn't always cruel. I remember him laughing once, maybe twice. He used to build toy airplanes with me. Then one day he just stopped trying. That was Gregory. Intense affection one moment, complete withdrawal the next. Love to him had always been a weapon, something to grant or withhold at will. "You deserved better," I said quietly. "So did he," James replied. That caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He glanced at me, his eyes darker now. "Whatever happened between you two, whatever made him like that, it broke both of you." "Didn't it?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because he was right. That night, after James went inside, I took the envelope. I didn't open it. That wasn't my right. But I traced my fingers over Gregory's handwriting. 30 years of silence. And still his words could reach across time like barbed wire. Later, I found myself in Spencer's old study, surrounded by blueprints and photographs. I stood before a picture of Gregory as a child, gap-toothed, smiling, sitting on Spencer's shoulders. What had gone wrong between that boy and the man he became? I whispered into the quiet room. "You built houses, Spencer. I built walls." Weeks passed before James mentioned the letter again. We were driving to a ribbon-cutting ceremony for one of Havenwood's new developments. Sophie was at school, and the highway stretched endlessly ahead, lined with palms swaying in the humid air. "I opened it," he said suddenly. I glanced at him. "And?" It wasn't what I expected. "He's in a veterans facility in Savannah. Liver failure. Said he doesn't have long." My heart sank. "He asked to see you?" "Yes, us." "Us?" He nodded. "He knows you're alive, somehow. He said he wants to make things right before he dies." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Right, the word felt hollow. What could possibly be made right after all this time? "James," I said carefully, "you don't owe him anything." He looked out the window. "Maybe not, but I need answers." "Don't you?" The road hummed beneath us, a low, steady sound like the pulse of fate. We arrived at the facility 2 days later. The air smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers. A nurse led us down a narrow corridor to a small private room. Gregory Sterling lay propped up against thin pillows, a shadow of the man I once knew. His hair was gray, his skin paper-thin, his eyes, still sharp, still familiar, lifted as the door opened. For a moment, time folded. I was 29 again, standing in this man's childhood bedroom, begging him not to leave. He looked at me first. Not at James, not at Sophie clinging to my hand. At me. "So it's true," he whispered. "You're not dead." "I could say the same to you," I replied evenly. He coughed, a dry, rasping sound. "I deserve that." James stood silently at the foot of the bed. the tension in his body almost visible. Gregory's gaze moved to him. "You look like him, Spencer." "I've heard that," James said quietly. "You found him," Gregory said to me, his voice trembling. "Of course you did. You always had to have the last word." I stiffened, but James stepped closer. "This isn't about her, Dad. It's about you." Gregory tried to sit up straighter, failed, and sank back against the pillows. "I did what I had to. You'll never understand." "Then help me," James said, his voice steady but firm. "Help me understand." There was a long pause. Then Gregory turned his face toward the window. "When your grandfather died, I blamed her," he said finally. "Said she pushed him too hard. That she cared more about Havenwood than him. I wanted to hurt her the way I thought she'd hurt me." He swallowed, his voice breaking. "So I took everything. The accounts, the properties, the trust. I left her with nothing. And when I realized what I'd done, it was too late." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the machines. James's jaw tightened. "You told me she was dead." Gregory's eyes closed. "It was easier than telling you the truth." I exhaled, every muscle in my chest trembling. "And what truth is that?" He opened his eyes again, glassy, unguarded. "That I couldn't bear the weight of being your son." The drive back was quiet. Sophie slept in the back seat, her small face peaceful against the hum of the car. James finally spoke. "He's dying, Alice." "I know. I don't hate him," he said softly. "I thought I would, but I don't." I looked at him, proud and heartbroken all at once. "That's because you're stronger than he ever was." He smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. "Maybe, but I think we both know. If it weren't for you, I'd have become him." The words stayed with me long after we reached Havenwood, because somewhere deep inside, I knew the same was true. Saving him had been my redemption, but forgiving Gregory, that would be his. We sat in one of the smaller conference rooms, the kind reserved for private meetings or delicate negotiations. The city skyline stretched wide beyond the glass wall, a glimmering world built by ambition, effort, and legacy. Gregory took the chair across from me, Brenda beside him, both avoiding my gaze. I'd chosen this room intentionally. Neutral, quiet, no power in it except what truth could hold. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence between us was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. 30 years, I said finally, folding my hands on the table. 30 years since you walked out of Havenwood and out of my life. Gregory shifted in his seat. "You mean since you pushed me out?" he said. I tilted my head slightly. "Is that how you remember it?" His jaw tightened. "You made me feel like a stranger in my own home. You and Father both, always judging, always comparing me to some impossible standard." "You mean a standard built on integrity," I replied quietly. "On responsibility, on decency." He looked away, his voice rising. "You never understood me. You and Father only cared about appearances, about the company. I wanted more than that. More than what your father built with his own hands?" My tone sharpened. "More than the values he lived by? Tell me, Gregory, what exactly did you want?" He didn't answer right away. Brenda's hand brushed his arm, a silent cue to calm himself. "We're not here to argue," she said carefully. "We only want to see James, to explain things." I let out a breath that trembled only slightly. "Explain things?" Gregory leaned forward, a glint of old defiance in his eyes. "He's our son. You had no right to take him from us." That stung, sharp and instant, like salt in an old wound. I rose slowly from my chair, crossing to the window. The city glittered below, endless movement and light. "I didn't take him," I said softly. "You abandoned him." Gregory's face flushed. "We were struggling. It was temporary. You left him under a bridge." My voice cracked, years of restraint breaking through. "Do you know what that means, Gregory? Do you understand what that looked like? I found your son feverish, starving, holding his baby in his arms while the rain poured through holes in a tarp. Temporary doesn't look like that." Brenda's composure faltered. She blinked quickly, her lips tightening. "I didn't know," she murmured. I turned, my eyes meeting hers. You didn't want to know. Gregory stood abruptly, his hands braced on the table. You think you're some kind of savior, don't you? You think you can just erase us and rewrite the story? I didn't erase you, I said. You did that yourself. His mouth opened, then closed. For a moment he looked almost small. The defiant boy stripped away, leaving only a man facing the ruins of his own choices. I sat back down. My voice steadied. Gregory, what is it you truly want from James? His tone softened slightly. I want to be part of his life again. He's my son. I studied him carefully, searching for sincerity, something real. And what about Sophie? I asked. Does she deserve to know the truth of what her grandparents did? He faltered. Brenda reached for his hand. We've made mistakes, she said quietly. But people can change. Yes, I said. They can, but change is proven, not proclaimed. I could see his temper beginning to boil again. You think he'll listen to you? He's an adult now. He can make his own choices. I nodded slowly. You're right, and he will, but not today. You won't ambush him in the lobby of his own company. His own company? Gregory spat the words like venom. That company should have been mine. There it was. The truth beneath the civility. The same hunger that had taken root in him decades ago. I leaned forward, my voice calm but cold. That company was never yours, Gregory. Havenwood belonged to the man who built it, and to the ideals you rejected. You were handed every opportunity. Your father trusted you, and you squandered it. He slammed his palm against the table. You never gave me a chance. The sound echoed through the glass and steel room, sharp and hollow. You had every chance, I said softly. You were your father's only son. You could have carried his name with honor. Instead, you used it like a weapon. Brenda stood now, tears glistening in her eyes. Alice, please. He's been through a lot. We both have. We need a fresh start. Maybe James can help us. Just until we get back on our feet. The words were rehearsed. I'd heard versions of them before, from people who saw generosity as weakness. I see, I murmured. You're not here for reconciliation. You're here for a lifeline. Gregory's lips curled in a bitter smile. You've always thought the worst of me. I met his gaze unflinching. No, Gregory. I've simply learned to stop pretending otherwise. Silence again, heavy and final. Finally, I stood and walked to the door. You'll leave now, I said, and you will not contact James. If he chooses to see you someday, it will be on his own terms, not yours. He stared at me, disbelief flickering across his face. You'd really keep a son from his parents? I turned back to him, meeting his eyes one last time. I'm protecting a man from the people who once left him to die. Brenda let out a quiet sob. Gregory looked as though he might speak, but no words came. I opened the door and nodded to security waiting outside. Please see them out. As they left, Gregory turned his head slightly. For a fleeting second, our eyes met. A storm of regret, anger, and something that might have been sorrow. Then he was gone. I stayed in that conference room long after the door closed, the silence wrapping around me like a shroud. My hands trembled as I reached for the window, steadying myself against the cool glass. The skyline blurred through the tears I hadn't meant to shed. For 30 years I had waited for that confrontation. I'd imagined it 100 different ways. Anger, forgiveness, heartbreak. I'd thought closure might come with words, but it didn't. Closure, I realized, was a quiet thing. A truth accepted, not won. That evening, James stopped by my house. Sophie ran through the sunroom with a paper crown she'd made at daycare, laughter echoing like sunlight. Margaret said you came down to the lobby earlier, James said, studying me carefully. I hesitated. Yes, I spoke with some people. Who? His eyes were too perceptive. His father's eyes, but gentler. Your parents, I said finally. He didn't move. Didn't speak, just stood there, breathing shallowly. They wanted to see you, I continued quietly. I told them that decision belongs to you. James's jaw clenched. His voice was low, steady. And what do you think I should do? I met his gaze, my voice trembling just enough to betray the weight of it. I think you should protect the life you've built, James. Protect Sophie. That's what your grandfather would have done." He nodded slowly. "Then that's what I'll do." He bent to pick up Sophie, who reached for him with a giggle, her small hands bright with paint and glitter. As he carried her toward the garden, sunlight spilled across their faces, 2 generations of light after so many years of shadow. I stood watching them, my heart full and breaking at once. For the first time in decades, I felt Spencer beside me. Not as memory, but as presence. He would have been proud. He would have said, "We don't build houses, Alice. We build the place where a family feels safe." And at last, I knew. Havenwood had become exactly that again, a place where the past had finally come home, and peace had found a way to stay. There are mornings when I still wake before dawn, the quiet hours, when the world feels suspended between what was and what's yet to come. I used to dread that stillness. Back then, it meant another day to fill with business meetings and polished indifference. But now, it means the sound of Sophie's laughter drifting down the hall, and the smell of pancakes from the kitchen. Havenwood finally feels alive again. It's strange, isn't it, how a house can hold its breath for decades? Every portrait, every creaking stair, every closed door just waiting for someone to come home. When James and Sophie moved in, it wasn't a grand announcement. No cameras, no staff, just 3 suitcases, a worn stuffed rabbit, and a sleepy child who whispered, "Where's my room, Grandma?" I showed her the one at the end of the hall, sunlight spilling across pale blue walls, the same color Spencer painted our son's nursery so many years ago. And when she ran in and threw herself on the bed with a giggle, I realized the house was breathing again. The months that followed were a kind of quiet redemption. James settled into his new role at Havenwood like he was born for it. The board stopped calling him the replacement and started calling him the future. And Sophie, she turned every corner of this cold marble house into something warmer. Her drawings cover the refrigerator. Her toys are scattered across the den. She drags her little red wagon through my rose garden every morning, collecting fallen petals for Grandpa Spencer's angels, she says. Sometimes, I catch James watching her, the same way Spencer used to watch Gregory when he was small. But this time there's no fear behind his eyes, only hope. I kept expecting Gregory or Brenda to try again, but months turned into a year, and silence became its own kind of peace. The restraining order held, and Havenwood security kept their distance quiet but firm. I don't hate them anymore. Hatred is heavy, and I've carried it long enough. But forgiveness, that's not something I owe them. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't for the ones who broke us. It's for the parts of ourselves that never stopped bleeding after they did. Last week, we broke ground on the new Havenwood Homes project, affordable housing for single parents and displaced families. It's the kind of thing Spencer used to dream about. Standing there with the shovel in my hand, I felt the wind off the ocean and thought, he'd be proud of us. James gave a speech that day. Calm, thoughtful, everything his father never was. He talked about legacy, about rebuilding what was lost. But when he said, "This company was built by a man who believed every family deserves a home," his voice cracked just slightly, and I saw Spencer in him. Afterward, he found me off stage, holding Sophie on my hip. "She wants to see the bulldozers again," I said, smiling. He grinned. "Of course she does. She's your granddaughter." That night, the 3 of us sat by the pond behind Havenwood. It's not large, just a circle of still water surrounded by white lilies and old stone. Spencer used to call it our reflection pool. Sophie insists it's the fairy lake. We added fish just like she wanted, bright flashes of orange darting under the surface. Sometimes she names them after people she loves. Grandpa Fish, she says. Uncle Fish. And one little gold one she calls Second Chance. I asked her once why. She shrugged, the way only a 5-year-old can. Because that's what we got. Out of the mouths of children, as Spencer used to say. It's funny how time softens even the hardest memories. There was a time I couldn't walk past Spencer's study without feeling my chest tighten. Now it's James's office. The walls are still lined with Spencer's books, but there are new ones too. Urban design, social policy, Even a few children's picture books Sophie insisted belong for inspiration. She visits him there every day after preschool, dragging her backpack across the floor. He lets her sit at his desk, pretending to sign papers. Yesterday I found one of her contracts, a scribbled crayon note that said, "Rule number 1, everyone gets a home." I framed it. People sometimes ask if I ever regret not reconciling with Gregory before the end. But reconciliation requires two willing hearts. His was too hardened by pride, mine too scarred by grief. Still, I think about him sometimes, wondering if he ever told Brenda the truth about why we froze him out. Wondering if he ever looked at his son and saw what he'd almost destroyed. I hope he did, and I hope it haunted him enough to change, because cycles only end when someone decides they must. And I decided, the media calls James the rebuilder. They run glossy profiles about the Sterling dynasty restored. They don't see the quiet work behind those headlines. The 4 a.m. calls, the budget debates, the long nights I sit awake, still hearing Spencer's voice reminding me, "Legacy isn't marble and glass. Alice, it's what we leave in people." He was right. And for the first time, I believe we've done that. Tonight, I'm writing this from the veranda, the same spot where Spencer and I used to watch the sunset. The sky's on fire again, all gold and rose and violet. Sophie is chasing fireflies in the garden, her laughter echoing through the dusk. James is reading on the porch steps, his tie loosened, a glass of lemonade beside him. I look at them, and I feel something I haven't felt in decades. Stillness, without emptiness. Silence, without sorrow. I finally understand that peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of purpose. Tomorrow, we'll visit Spencer's grave. Sophie has been collecting petals again, and James said she wants to decorate Grandpa's stone with flowers that match the sky. I think he'd like that. I'll tell him everything, that his company is thriving, that our grandson is kind, that the child named after a storm is now the light that fills this house. And maybe, somewhere beyond all this, he already knows. When I close my eyes now, I don't see the empty safe, or the bridge, or the rain. I see Sophie's tiny hand tugging mine, James's steady voice calling her in for dinner, and the pond's quiet shimmer reflecting the fading sun. 30 years ago, grief buried me alive. Now love has dug me back out. This house waited for us, and we came home.